Okay. Well, thank you very much, Governor, for introducing this topic. It's one which has become more and more visible, I think, to everyone who's watching the arrival of ChatGPT, BARD, and other large-scale language models that don't always work the way we expect them to. And it's important in this conversation to recognize that we're really not talking about what's called artificial general intelligence, or AGI. We're really talking about machine learning, which is a narrower kind of intelligence that uses multi-layer neural networks, which were discounted in the 1960s as inadequate, but which clearly over the last decade or even 2 decades have been shown to be extremely powerful in their functionality. However, they are often erratic in terms of their results. And it's the erratic nature of machine learning.
Wonderful. Yeah.
I'm sorry, Tuan, did you want to interrupt for a moment?
No. Please continue. Yeah.
So here's the problem we have. We recognize that there are risks associated with the use of machine learning. And I think we might choose to categorize the risks in the same way that self-driving cars or cars that with various functionality have been categorized as to risk. Those of you who have been following the self-driving car saga will know that a ranking system has been established. Class 0 is manual only, no assistance whatsoever, humans required to drive the car. And then the next level up, level 1, is called limited assistance. This is where you get warnings. For example, you might have a signal on your rear view mirror that says there's a car in the lane next to you, don't try to change the lane. It's only a signal, it's a warning, but you're in charge of steering the car. Auto braking is another example where the car has the ability to detect that you're approaching the car in front of you faster than the braking system could respond, and so it automatically sounds an alarm and might even auto brake. Partial automation is the next level up, and that's steering, possibly maintaining the car in line, possibly accelerating or decelerating if you are following the car in front of you. The next level they call conditional automation, where the human monitors what the car is doing, but the car might automatically change lanes after you've shown that you want to do so by turning the turn signal on. And high automation is essentially where the car drives itself, but often within a certain geo-fenced area. So as an example, the car might drive itself on a highway, but not in a neighborhood, not in an underground garage. And then finally, full automation, where there is no human intervention required at all. There might not even be a steering wheel, an accelerator, and a brake. So those are the levels of risk factor and functionality that have been defined for self-driving cars. And we might want to consider something like that for the use of machine learning tools. And I don't pretend to try to be as refined as 6 different levels here, but roughly speaking, there might be low risk operation of a machine learning system, for example, to make suggestions to you about what movies you might want to watch or books you might want to read, or maybe writing fiction, which is what ChatGPT seems to be very good at doing, or maybe image generation. And even in these kinds of applications, we'd want to be careful that the users are fully aware that the system is not to be trusted necessarily, that it doesn't know the difference between that which is considered fact and that which is not. So that would be kind of low risk applications. Moderate risk applications might have to do with recommendations whose acceptance might have risk factors associated with it. One example is things like where you should go for vacation, or what hotels you should select, or even flight selection, you probably want to do some double checking to make sure that the advice that you're getting doesn't involve showing up at the wrong airport or getting on the plane at the wrong time. And then the very high risk cases would be any kind of medical diagnosis, recommendation for treatment, automated surgery. And in that particular case, the high risk side, even the things that are not automated, but which are teleporting the actions of a surgeon, as some of you will be familiar with. There's a company called Intuitive Surgical that makes a remote controlled, humanly controlled robot that does laparoscopic surgery. You can just imagine how carefully the software and hardware is analyzed to make sure that it does only what the surgeon is trying to do, doesn't try to take over or perhaps make an incision in the wrong place. And so I would consider those to be very high risk. I'm sure as we learn more and more about how these systems work, we'll be able to refine a kind of risk table in order to determine how much restriction and validation should be placed on systems operating at these different service levels. There are quite a list of challenges that lie ahead, in my opinion. One of them is our inability to predict or anticipate how the system might go off the rails. These systems, as you know, are trained by ingesting huge amounts of input and adjusting the, I would say, the weights and probabilities of, a huge number of pseudo neurons in the multi-layer system. And it's almost mysterious in a way. There are a number of different feedback loops for adjusting the various weights that determine what output comes out as a result of a given input. But it isn't always obvious that we can predict what a particular input will produce in the way of output, even though we might train against a set of materials for image recognition, for example. We do know that sometimes you present an image that it wasn't trained with and it comes out with the wrong conclusion and perhaps the wrong identification. We also are familiar with something called generative adversarial networks. This is where, for example, one system is trying to do image recognition and the other neural network is trying to twiddle a few small pixels in an image to confuse the identification system. And it's quite shocking to discover that a small number of pixel changes can cause the recognition system to fail dramatically. So as an example, I remember one image of a cat was correctly recognized by the image recognition system. 3 pixels were changed. Of course, a human being looking at this doesn't even notice that the pixels were changed, but the system doing the automatic recognition declares it's a fire truck. And the only way to understand such a failure is to appreciate the high dimensionality of these machine learning systems. We're talking tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions or billions of parameters that are part of the system's operation. I would say humans are would find it very difficult to imagine and intuitively understand how something could go wrong. So that's one thing. The second thing that we could worry about is that when we're running these systems, can we tell when they have produced an off-the-rails condition? Those of you who have been reading reports of the ChatGPT will notice that the system has apparently, I don't know this for fact, but it appears to have 2 layers of operation. One of them is the large language model that's been trained in response, but the other one appears to be like an executive function. And when it detects that the output has gone off the rails, it reports that, and it may even essentially claw back its output. And there have been a few examples where not only does it take the output away, but it refuses to admit that it did that, which is pretty hilarious. But the idea here is that you put in another layer of machine learning to detect off the rails condition and then respond to that. Another thing which has been very troublesome is explainability. After one of these large language models or other large models has come to a conclusion of one kind or another, And then you ask, why did you come to that conclusion? It's been very hard to explain what the rationale was, because the answer is we trained it on 1 billion pictures and this is the output, end of story. And that's not satisfying for many people. One thing that we, in my opinion, do not know how to do yet is to build model building machine learning systems. And what do I mean by that? Where they speak to large language models, and so you say, well, isn't that a model building system? The answer is yes, that's a model of grammatical and sometimes semantically well-formed sentences or paragraphs. That's a model. But I'm thinking about a system which takes input and builds a logical model of what it is detecting, and then reasons about that model. To give you an example of that, I want you to think about a table for a moment. What is it that makes a table a table? And the answer is, well, it's a flat surface that's perpendicular to the gravitational field. Of course, no one thinks of it that way, but that's the essence of table. And it's a flat surface. Any 2-year-old figures out that if you have something with a flat bottom, you can put it on the table. It will be held up against, falling, and it doesn't roll off the table. And pretty quickly, that 2-year-old also figures out, well, a box could be a table, or a chair could be a table, or my lap could be a table. So this ability to generalize from small numbers of examples and then reason about it is a hallmark of human intelligence. As far as I'm aware, we don't have very good examples of that kind of functionality. We also typically don't have real-time learning. So we train these systems over some period of time with huge amounts of stuff. And then we run them in the application. But what typically does not happen is that the system is getting feedback during its operation in order to learn more, whereas humans typically learn from their mistakes in real time. And the last point is planning. And that's building systems that can take input and make plans and make recommendations. For example, Google Maps or other driving aids take information in and use concurrent information to make recommendations for paths for you to follow. That kind of planning is further advanced in the right kind of context, in well-constrained context. So all of this is to suggest to you that if you think that regulation is needed, you're probably correct. But you might not be correct that we know how to regulate or how to express the regulation. It feels like it is premature to try to assert boundaries that we want to enforce if we don't know how to do that, if we don't know what the mechanisms are to implement the constraints that we're interested in. And just to wrap up, since I'm almost over time here, another thing which is troubling for a lot of people is misinformation and disinformation. And we wish that we could limit the propagation of this kind of non-information, if you like. It's one thing to be entertained. It's something else to be misinformed. And yet it turns out to be very difficult sometimes to discern fact from fiction. And it's the fact that even human beings have trouble doing that suggests that machine learning systems may have as much or more trouble. And so when someone says, well, can't you just train a machine learning system to filter out all the fictitious information that you're getting? And the answer is, we don't know how to do that. At least I certainly don't. So let's be careful about trying to put regulations in place that we don't actually know how to implement. Putting laws together that are unenforceable is generally a very bad idea. Yeah. So, Governor, I'll stop there. And I assume now we have other people to discuss this challenge. But thank you for giving me an opportunity to rant for a little while.